Back in April of 2013, I went through something that I haven't been able to talk about. I was paid a significant amount of money to stay quiet, and in return for signing a 10-year agreement to shut the hell up. Now that that time is up, I've considered my options. I could just let this go and never speak of it again. I won't gain anything from speaking out, and I got a lot to lose. But then again, this is just an anonymous post online. Words have less meaning that way. West Virginia. It was hotter than hell, without a whiff of wind. I was coming home from a visit to my aunt. She'd broken her leg and I couldn't leave her house. I was making my way back home, taking the I-64 out of Lewisburg. It started with the radio. It was playing that one Macklemore song. I heard it 100 times over. The sound was cutting in and out in a quick staccato, then disappeared completely. I could hear cars honking up front as a line began to form. There was a sway in the trees, as if greater and greater pressure was being put on them. I could hear wind rushing against the left side of the car, forcing me to pull the other way to compensate. I closed the sunroof as dust clouds blew past, staining the windshield. Then, a rumble. It sounded like thunder, but from the ground. Like a groaning bellow, growing louder and clearer by the second. And as it reached its peak, I could see trees toppling over. A small Kia got pushed off balance and swerved off the road. And as the sound died down, the road devolved into chaos. Some were desperately changing lanes, others were stepping on the brakes, and I got my door scraped as the car behind me sped past. The radio was playing an automated message, a local emergency alert, referred to as a geological event. We were asked to turn off the air conditioning, slow down, and divert to the nearest exit. It repeated in a monotone voice. Geological event. No air conditioning. Slow down. Divert to nearest exit. Minutes passed, and there was a line forming further down the road. Police officers blocked the lanes in all directions, leaving a highway exit as the only option. Some folks were trying to push past the barricades, but were forced back at gunpoint. I could see officers wearing gas masks and riot shields. We were waved in, and I followed the exit and I got directed to the right. There was an open field that was being used as sort of a impromptu parking lot. Cars were being waved in and parked in a way that boxed us in, leaving no room for us to open our doors in either direction unless we got parked on the edge. 4 lines of cars with about 10 to 15 vehicles per line. Surplus vehicles were directed further down the road. The place was packed, and I got stuck in the second row, about 6 cars in. Pretty much everyone around me were on their phones. I didn't have anyone to call, but there seemed to be an issue getting a signal through. The radio still repeated the emergency message. Voices were getting louder. A man 2 cars to my left leaned out of a gap in the door, screaming at the officers to answer his question. They responded immediately with a warning shot, straight into the air.
"Stay in your vehicles,"
they screamed.
"Lock your doors. I'm not telling you again."
A couple of folks were filming, but there seemed to be trouble uploading. We were losing bandwidth. It didn't take long until phone signals were completely blocked. I think a video or 2 of that officer firing into the air made it online. They were patrolling back and forth. We were told to stay in our vehicles, windows up, doors closed and locked, and engines off. I could hear people talking to the other cars. Someone said that there'd been a natural gas leak from the geological event, and that combustible engines could spark an explosion. Others were talking about a terrorist attack. There were no answers, and the officers weren't eager to talk. After about an hour, things were getting ugly. People were hungry, thirsty, and restless. One officer stepped up in front of the cars, handing out water bottles and crackers and processed cheese slices. He had to step one car to another, denting the hoods with his steel-tipped shoes. They were also handing out thick plastic hygiene bags for people who needed to relieve themselves.
"Use them, seal them, drop them out the door, then lock up and wait."
I'd crawled into the back seat, pulled down my cap, and I tried to relax. I'd been playing some games on my phone, but the battery was running low. I wanted to save some, so I settled for having a nap instead. The sweat was stinging my eyes. Not because of how warm it was, but because of how nervous I was. No matter what I did, I felt trapped, and the car felt smaller and smaller. I couldn't get out if I wanted to, and it physically hurt me to think about how little control I had. Is that what claustrophobia feels like? A couple of officers were discussing something by the front line. One of them had a white cotton glove on, which he used to wipe off the hood of one of the front of the cars. The glove was taken off and put into a bag, which in turn was sealed with a hot air gun. I was getting the impression that our cars had been covered in something. I wasn't the only one considering it. There were 2 college kids in the car to my left, and they were discussing it too. "Anthrax," one of them said. "Gotta be." "Nah, gold dust," the other chuckled. "They don't want to share." "You know what?" the first groaned. "I honest to God hope you're right. You're not, but I hope you are. Hey, fuck you." I joined in on the conversation shortly after. I offered another explanation. Something combustible. Something that might blow up if we started our cars. They were willing to consider it. The car behind me couldn't hear us, but the driver held up a notebook with the text, "If we don't know what, it's gotta be aliens." I couldn't tell if he was serious, but they weren't laughing about it. A man in his 50s and what looked like his daughter. There were a couple of other folks in the other cars. A man in a black shirt, sort of looked like a preacher without a collar. 2 middle-aged women with a kid in the back seat. A fat man blaring Johnny Cash from his stereo. A couple with a teenage son who couldn't stop drumming on the windows. We'd been stuck for about 2, maybe 2.5 hours, when a truck rolled in. One of these with a large water tank. It was unmarked and looked civilian. And as it rolled in, they were calling out on a megaphone.
"All right, everyone. We will be hosing your vehicles down,"
they said.
"Keep everything locked and closed. Then we'll be covering your vehicles with protective plastic while we wait for it to dry. After that, we'll start letting you go in an orderly manner. I repeat."
Most of us were relieved. It was only a matter of time now. It was getting dark. They were getting on the cars, hosing them down thoroughly. It smelled of chlorine, so maybe they'd mixed something into the water. And as they came to my car, I stepped up on it and double-checked the sunroof, making sure that it was locked and secured. They sprayed the cars down, bathing it in the chemical stink, the kind that gets stuck into the back of your throat. It took a long time for them to finish, at least an hour or 2. And after that, they were rolling out a kind of plastic cover at the short side of the lot, the kind that they use to protect pools or rain covers for football fields. They used 2 squad cars to slowly drape the whole thing over the entire lot, securing the edges with large rocks.
"Please stay calm,"
they called out as the plastic scrawled over us. I did as I was told. I stayed inside and I watched the plastic covers sweep over me. It felt like getting buried alive. All lights went out, leaving me in complete darkness, accompanied only by the vague, disembodied voices of the others. The college kids were talking about where they were going to go after this. Someone was honking, not sure if it was to show support or discontent. Someone else was cheering. And I took my last swig of water, washing down my final plain cracker. I got back in the driver's seat. I could hear as they finished moving the plastic cover and parking the squad vehicles. And I waited patiently, figuring it'd be maybe another hour or so. They haven't really given us a timeline, but I could breathe a little easier. Sort of. I was going back and forth between feeling empowered with my hands on the wheel and feeling like I was stuck in a metal coffin. It was so dark, and everything smelt of plastic and chemicals, like a car wash stuck in time. As the excitement died down, I paid more attention to the background sounds. I tried to filter out the various discussions from the nearby cars, and somewhere in the distance I heard raised voices. It wasn't coming from one of the cars, but the officers. Whatever they were talking about, it was a heated discussion. An hour came and went, and people were getting impatient. More cars were honking, others were yelling, demanding answers. I couldn't get my leg to stop shaking. The more I thought about getting out of there, the smaller the car felt. I was hyper-focused on things that I couldn't control. I was a little thirsty, and I was out of water. I needed to use the bathroom. I wanted to stretch my legs and go for a walk. I wanted to breathe fresh air and get that awful chemical taste out of my mouth. I heard cars starting, accelerating. The truck was moving, somewhere off to the side.
We need you to stay in your vehicles.
A voice screamed over the megaphone.
Do not leave for any reason. Stay in your vehicle.
Cars speeding off. Not many, but a couple. And then quiet. The officers left us there. Everyone was quiet. A couple of folks had opened up their phones, using them as flashlights to look from car to car. Looking out at the sea of vehicles, all of us trapped under the dark cover. I could see a handful of lights cut off by sharp silhouettes. I couldn't make out who was who in the dark. It was all just people. Anonymous. I heard a gasp somewhere in the back. There was a metallic clunk, like when the officers climbed atop our cars to get us water. There was a clear cheer as some folks figured out that they were taking off the plastic cover. But that wasn't it. Instead, there were more footsteps, and the cheers slowly died down as more and more footsteps pattered across our cars. I stopped counting after a dozen. The silhouettes in the cars were still there. We all held our breath, waiting for an answer to show itself. What the hell was going on? What was that sound? And somewhere off to my right, I heard a voice.
Who's up there?
It sounded like an older man. I'd seen a pickup truck that way earlier. Almost as a response, the footsteps stopped. There was a faint clicking sound, like someone snapping their tongue against the roof of their mouth. And from further away, a click in response. From somewhere to my left, another couple clicks. Then a cascade of clicks. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. There was an awful metallic noise coming from my right and then breaking glass. A scream cut short, followed by several irregular taps of the car horn. One of the silhouettes in the distance turned into a blur as someone passed through the windshield, cutting through the plastic cover. Somewhere in the front row, the roof of the car was cut wide open. Someone was pulled out of their seat. 2 cars from where I was, there was more glass breaking. It sounded like a wild animal got in. I could see a weak hint of red spattered against the passenger side window. I wasn't getting any air. I could feel my heart beating through my chest as my arms started shaking. My hands were cramping around the steering wheel and I felt sweat dripping down my shoulders. I couldn't control it. I didn't even see what was going on with those sounds, those screams. They awakened something primal. This was danger, a threat. My body knew long before I did. The college kids in the other car were ducking down. One of them waved a hand at me as if telling me to get down, and I nodded. I scrambled into the back seat. I couldn't see where I was putting my hands or my feet. Everything was different in the dark, and as I tumbled my way over, my foot accidentally tapped the car horn. It was a quick tap, a fraction of a second, but to me, it was the loudest sound in the world. I was lying on my stomach in the back seat, and within seconds, something heavy climbed onto the hood of my car. I could feel the car buckling. It was much heavier than the man who'd passed out water bottles. I held my hands in front of my mouth to stop the panting, but I just ended up snorting up sweat instead. My nose stung as I bit my tongue, listening to every metallic groan as whatever was outside moved and shifted. And from behind my car, a click in response. There were no lights being held up anymore. Everyone was cowering and going quiet. I pushed myself up against the door behind the driver's seat, trying to make myself as small as possible. I could hear the frame of the car complain as something slowly moved. And when it came to my sunroof, there was a slight crack that made it stop. Another crack, and I silently shook my head as if trying to ask the car to stop. That thing was going to break, and it did. My legs were showered with glass as a big blob of plastic cover dripped into my car. Something big came tumbling into the front seat. I was going to be swarmed within seconds. I fumbled with my hands, accidentally cutting my thumb on the broken glass. I managed to open the passenger side door, but even at its widest, and even when pressed into the college kid's car, it wasn't enough room to get out. Still, I had to try. I pressed myself into the gap and exhaled as much as I could, flattening my chest. While that thing thrashed around inside my car, I could feel my vision going faint. Black spots popped up at the edge of my vision. My arms were getting weak, and yet by some miracle, I made it through. And as my face hit the gravel of the makeshift parking lot, I felt the burn of residue chemicals. I swallowed my instinct to run, instead staying on my stomach, forcing myself to crawl under my car. There were more of them, some climbing on and some off. My chest was pressed to the ground as the weight shifted, and I heard breaking glass from the windshield and tearing fabric. Something was stuck in there, and it was furious, like a trapped animal. I could hear the college kids mumbling to one another, trying to stay calm, one assuring the other that all they had to do was stay low, stay quiet, and wait. Then something slammed into the passenger side door, the one that I crawled out of. The door was pressed up against the neighboring car, then fell haphazardly to the ground, completely off the hinges. An ink-black, bird-like foot touched the ground right next to me. I've looked it up since. There were 3 toes forward, 1 toe backward, all clawed. Anisodactyl feet, similar to that of many birds of prey, except larger than a human foot and with smooth, oil-slick skin. It must have been heavy, at least 400 pounds. If the clicking noise came from its mouth, I can approximate that it was somewhere between 6'7" to 6'9", or taller if it could have been hunched over. How it managed to walk in the gap between the vehicles is beyond me, but I suspect that it was very thin. It daintily walked from my car to the others, as if scanning for something. I could barely see anything in the dark, but this thing seemed to navigate it perfectly. It didn't bump into anything. There was a tap of the glass of the car behind me, to my right, and someone got startled. A short scream, and the hunt was on. This time was different. It must have caused some kind of chain reaction, as all of a sudden the plastic cover was getting torn up left to right. People were clawing their way out of their vehicles, and I heard someone kicking against the windshield. Another was trying to open their door. I could hear it slamming against the side of the car next to it, and off in the distance there was gunfire, just a couple of shots. The college kids in the car next to me slammed their doors open and followed my lead. They rolled onto the ground and under the car. There was a little more light coming in as the cover had been torn off. Their faces were red from tears, and one of them was desperately trying to call for help on his phone. The other grabbed the phone out of his hand. A short scuffle ensued, ending with one of them putting on a ringtone and sliding the thing as far to the left as they could. Whatever car that phone landed under was demolished, every window broken, every passenger gone. I could hear the grinding as the seat was ripped in two and thrown away. In a matter of seconds, an entire vehicle was torn to pieces as a dozen of those things swarmed it. "Shut up!" one of the college kids repeated. "Shut up, shut up, shut up!" Something reached under my car. It scraped against the sole of my shoe, tearing a hole all the way through my big toe. I hurried forward, scuttling like a lizard. The college kids noticed and followed suit. I don't think that they thought much about it. It was just movement, and they went for it. I made it 2 cars down before I got stuck. There was something dark in the way, and I couldn't get around it without exposing myself. I couldn't see what it was, but it didn't take long for me to figure it out. There was a meaty crunch, as if someone was biting chunks out of a piece of meat. They were struggling to get through the fabric of their clothes, making a snapping noise as threads gave way. A pool of blood rolled under the car, staining the tips of the fingers. It was still warm. One of those things were eating a victim. And I hunkered down, trying to remember to breathe, and as I stayed there waiting for a chance, any chance. I must have stayed there for at least an hour, hearing every bite, every crack of bone and snap of sinew, satisfied clicking noises. As it finished its meal, it wandered off, dragging the remains along. They were moving forward, something heavy walking over the car that I was hiding under, dragging a body along. And slowly the footsteps disappeared. It was quiet again. And in that quiet I found my footing. I made my way to the edge of the plastic cover. And I listened one final time, pushing one of the weights away and slipping through. They were gone. And I was out. I could feel my chest growing lighter, allowing me to breathe. I wanted to cry from relief. A breeze was picking up, drying the sweat on my brow and carrying the smell of grass. Stepping back, I turned towards the sea of cars to see how bad the damage was. And then I saw one. It was a bit off to the side, perched on top of an old Honda, and at a glance it looked like a tall person covered in a slick black ink. But looking closer, you could see the strange bird-like feet, the pointed nails, the long row of shark-like teeth on a mouth that was far too wide. And I froze. The thing rose to its full length, easily over 7 feet tall. It looked ready to pounce on me. I had nothing to defend myself with. I couldn't make any sudden movements. I wouldn't even be halfway under the car before the thing would be over me. 100 thoughts raced through my mind, but there was nothing that I could do. I was out of options. But the thing just looked at me. It raised a slice of raw meat, blood dripping onto the plastic cover. It looked at me curiously, taking a bite. Then, as if nothing had happened, it wandered off, satisfied. And I was left there, shaking like a dry leaf. And with the last of those things gone, all that was left was the panic. It didn't take long for the officers to return. The plastic cover was removed, but we couldn't go home. Not after this. Some of the folks signed a waiver and were let go immediately. They weren't allowed to talk about what they'd seen, and in return, they'd get a hefty sum of insurance money. Others demanded answers and were taken into custody for obstruction of justice. A few others still panicked to make any kind of sense and had to be checked out by medical professionals. A total of 14 people died. It was described by a combination of causes: a traffic pileup, carbon monoxide poisoning, an animal attack. I think there was something about an escaped convict, too. Excuses all over the place, and the times were all wrong, spread out through a couple of days to more smoothly blend it into accident statistics. And if you want to go home and get your insurance money, you had to sign a non-disclosure. I did. I know the college kids did as well. Goddamn miracle they made it out, but I saw them. 34 cars had to be towed. 18 people wounded, 6 seriously so. 4 people lost at least one limb. One guy had an arm ripped halfway up his collarbone. I don't know how he survived. Most people never saw those things up close. They just hear the screams and the breaking glass. Sometimes at night, that's all I hear too. Closing my eyes reminds me of lying under those cars, feeling the pressure of the weight shift. I still get trouble breathing, because I think a part of me is still stuck there. It stayed in my vehicle. I thought that she was playing a practical joke the first time that she did it. I was in the kitchen when she walked in the front door mid-conversation. She gave me a brief pause and introduced me to no one, apparently called Jeff. I gave her a quizzical glance, but she carried on the conversation, going as far as to pause as if waiting for the other person to reply. Really, Ian? You can't say hello? There's no one there. We didn't talk for a few days, and then on the weekend, she asked if I wanted to go have some drinks with some friends. I was still cranky, but agreed because, she's my wife. We arrived to an empty apartment. She told me not to bother knocking. My wife smiled as she let herself into the apartment. Said that she never heard us knocking over the chatter. My heart began to race as I watched my wife lean down, hugging people who were not there. She gave names of who was sitting in each empty chair, and I stared around the empty room, dazed. I gingerly took a seat in what I was hoping was an empty chair. You know what I mean. And I tried to play along with my wife. It happened again the next week. An art gallery opening. Her friend's exhibition. I started to lose my shit when I stood in an empty gallery, looking at empty picture frames. When I heard my wife ooh and ah over a fucking empty frame, I couldn't contain myself any longer. "What the hell has gotten into you?" she hissed. I played along at the start, but this is a joke. There is no one in the fucking room. and her face changed to worry. I haven't been playing any practical joke on you, I swear. I think you need to go and see the doctor. My wife wouldn't let up about me seeing a doctor, and so I gave in, and found myself sitting in an empty doctor's office, my wife nodding along with an empty office chair. A week or so later, I arrived home to my wife preparing dinner in our kitchen. She gave me a sheepish smile, a kiss on my cheek, and told me that she was sorry for messing with me. She was my wife, and I loved her. Chris was one of my college buddies. We had recently reconnected, and he invited me and the wife over for dinner. I greeted Chris and introduced him to my wife. We made some small talk, and my wife was reserved, and I tried to include her in more of the conversation. And after a while, Chris gave me a nervous laugh and asked if everything was okay. He looked awkward, his eyes not quite meeting mine. It's just that there's no one there. My wife tells me that she's real. I can feel the warmth of her skin against mine. She's my wife, and I believe her. It came in a vial by mail. There was an injection kit, but no instructions. The instructions were on the website. The guilt market. The first time Alex had done it, he'd used a belt, located a vein on his forearm, and injected the entire liquid at once. That was what the instructions said that you had to do to get paid. It was only theft, but the hit had been hard, like being hugged by someone made of razor blades. The pain lingered for weeks, but the Bitcoin showed up in his wallet as promised, and it helped Alex survive. He started doing it regularly after that, quit his job, and did guilt. The website concept was simple. If you felt guilty about something, anything, you could auction off that guilt, or a fraction of it, to one or more bidders who'd suffer it for you. The transactions were anonymous. The reasons for the guilt had to be described, but it didn't matter what they were. If someone was willing to take it, the marketplace facilitated the transaction. Alex had started light, but eventually moved on to more lucrative, harder stuff. When he took his first murder guilt, 1/25th, he thought that he'd die. But he didn't, and the Bitcoin arrived. Then Alex met Angie. She was a fellow student, and he introduced her to the marketplace, starting her off gently, but introducing her systematically to harder and harder hits. Angie was good at suffering, better even than he was, and she did it well. Tiny fractions of even the most heinous acts. The combined income was good. And one day, Angie saw a marketplace listing for something absolutely putrid, despicable, abuse and cruelty that was almost unimaginable. A total pot of 25 million. "We should take it all, each do half," she suggested. "I couldn't live with myself," said Alex. And he meant it. They'd spent the last few weeks trying to game the system, but it seemed impossible. The market was truly free, self-regulating. If you took for X, you could only resell for X. That was market value. No gain. Angie completed the 25 million transaction anyway, but when the vial arrived, she switched to labels and watched Alex inject what he believed was mere assault, and the hit destroyed him. Angie watched him writhe on the floor, muscles tense to the point of snapping, foaming at the mouth, unable to speak as he experienced guilt he was not prepared for, that nobody could have prepared for. Then she brought him a knife. It couldn't be murder, she decided. It had to be suicide. So she put the knife in his hand and encouraged him to end it. Finally, he slit his own throat. Then, feeling her guilt begin to rise, she put it up on auction on the marketplace. There were takers. Total pot, 10 million. Only a few days, she told herself. And she suffered horribly, but the pain was lifted and she was free. She had gamed the system. She had successfully laundered guilt. I tipped my head back, finishing the last few sips of my vodka soda. It was an unseasonably hot day, and the cool drink felt like ecstasy on my lips. "I'll take another," I said to the bartender as he walked by. Actually, make it a double." I check my phone and I see 4 missed calls from Scott. I'll deal with it later. A handsome man walks into the bar. He wears a tightly fitted suit and smells of expensive cologne as he passes by. We make eye contact for a brief moment and he holds my gaze, letting me know that he's interested. I let myself fantasize about living a single life again, of not being tied down. But as I look down at the ring on my finger, I'm quickly pulled back into reality. My phone rings, and I ignore the call but decide to close my tab. How long had I been there? 15 minutes at most, surely. I fumbled around in my purse, searching for my keys. I grabbed them but clumsily dropped them to the floor. Okay, maybe it had been like 20 minutes. Another phone call, and this time I answer.
"Samantha, Jesus, I've been trying to get a hold of you for hours!"
My phone was on silent. I'm just at the park."
"I see your location. You're at the fucking bar again."
"Shit, I thought I turned it off. I just needed to pick up my ID. I left it here last weekend. Just calm down."
"I checked your location 2 hours ago. Don't fucking lie to me."
2 hours. I checked my watch and my heart sank. Oh God, I could have sworn that I had just gotten here. I sprinted towards the door. I gotta go, Scott." I bust through the door and I screamed in horror as police surrounded my car. My phone dropped to the ground and I could hear Scott still screaming on the other end of the line.
"Samantha? Samantha! Oh God, don't tell me that you have Claire with you!"
Tears began rolling down my eyes as an officer shatters my backseat window. I didn't think that it had been that long. I thought that she would be okay. I sink to my knees and I yell out, and Scott still screams on the other end of the line as I watch the officer lean in and pull Claire's tiny, limp body from her car seat.